On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, the Oklahoma City Thunder need to figure out how they're going to develop Ousmane Dieng. What are the likely pathways for his rookie season? And how can he grow and reach his full potential? Plus, Summer League comes to a close. Let's grade every single player. Who made the biggest leap in Summer League? And who are we left with more questions than answers? Let's talk about it today on Locked On Thunder, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. I am your host, Rylan Stiles. You can follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LOThunderPod. Email the show, LOThunderPod@gmail.com. On today's show, brought to you by BetOnline, we're going to dive into the Oklahoma City Thunder wrapping up Summer League. What are the plans for Ousmane Dieng in his rookie season? How do we grade the Thunder Summer League roster? What comes next in OKC? All of this and more. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is where you can go, and they have you covered this year with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. Go check them out. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Thunder your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you talking Thunder basketball. I'm your host, member and editor-in-chief over at thunderousintentions.com, Rylan Stiles. So let's dive into Ousmane Dieng. He finally had that breakout game in Summer League against the Kings in a 86-80 win. Ousmane Dieng scored 12 points, hauled in 7 rebounds, an assist, a block, 1 for 2 from 3. Only missed 2 shots inside the arc. He missed 3 shots total. Looked really good with the ball in his hands. I mean, just really, really good whenever he was able to possess the basketball. And, this entire Summer League, the process has been really good for Ousmane Dieng. Like, he's taken good quality shots. He hasn't really forced much of anything. He hasn't really had any issues in Summer League. The shots just weren't falling. There were times where maybe he was not as aggressive as you like. There were times where it was clear he was trying to figure out what his role should be on the floor. But in general, he did everything the right way. The shots just didn't fall, and they didn't look as good on the box score the next morning. But in this game, this was the game where it was very evident why the Thunder drafted him. This was the game where it was very evident what his ceiling might be in the NBA. Now, of course, you never want to take too much away from one Summer League game, and this Summer League game does not make him, the next superstar in OKC. But it does give an outline of how he fits into this Thunder puzzle. Because this entire time, the Thunder have been looking for guys and looking for players that fit this mold. He's this 6'11" big, but he has guard-like skills. And, until his growth spurt, he was a guard. And you saw instances of individual plays in this game, not just the counting stats going up, but individual plays where the vision's clear. One of his threes was just so tightly contested, and the defender was right in his face, and his arm was covering up Dieng's face, and didn't matter. A step behind the line with the defender in his face, and Dieng buries it because he's so tall, he's so lengthy, and has that jump shot, that release point where he just couldn't get blocked on that play. One of those, 7 rebounds. He grabs it, turns, and goes coast to coast with a Euro step layup, which is exactly what the Thunder have been preaching since hiring Mark Daigneault. That's exactly what they've been trying to do. Positionless basketball. Everyone's a playmaker, grab and go, running in pace. It's why, the take foul change can be a big deal for OKC, if it's actually going to, perform the way the NBA wants it to, right? And it eliminates the take foul, and you can actually play fast and play in transition. So that was an example of it. Even defensively, whenever he got a block at the rim, that block, he was able to block the shot, get the ball, go coast to coast, dump it off to Eugene, and Eugene, of course, dunks it, got fouled, though. on that play. But, the grab and go stuff from him was really, really good. Much better game from him as a driver, too. Again, we mentioned the aggressiveness. As a driver in this game, off the dribble, kind of creating for himself at the rim and going to the rim with a full head of steam, he didn't shy away from that contact. He kind of absorbed it better, and he just was more assertive in his game at the rim than he had been in games past in OKC for this summer league period. And then we saw an instance where he was really good off ball. He relocated from the corner down to the dunker spot. Chet Holmgren finds him, and this was a play in which, he really had two options there. He could have stayed in the corner and likely would have had an open three-point shot from Chet Holmgren. He called for it. It didn't get it. Went down to the dunker spot. Then he got it. And when the pass came in from Chet Holmgren, Ousmane Dieng jumps up and gets the pass. And while he's in the air receiving the pass, he's able to kind of contort his body just a little bit to use his body as a shield of the against the defender and give himself an open layup on that play. So you can see those little things kind of coming together a bit for Ousmane Dieng in this way. And you just saw it against the Kings. Not only did the shots fall, but you saw the moments where, okay, this is a player that can fit the exact style, the exact system OKC wants to run. Now, in this game, he did hurt his right wrist, and he has a chip in it, a fracture. The team says he's going to be ready for training camp, though. So hopefully he's recovering nicely, and hopefully he is ready for training camp, and this doesn't kind of linger throughout his rookie year. But it is on his right wrist, or even longer than that. But, of course, hopefully he makes that speedy recovery. And, again, the team does think he'll be ready for training camp. But it's important that we got to see this game from Dieng. And not because Summer League is like this end-all, be-all, but just because, the Thunder clearly believe in him. They clearly invested in him with those future first-round picks and trading up, trading back into the first round to get him at 11 and keeping their pick at 12. The Thunder clearly believe he can have this high of a ceiling. And, he showed off some things in the NBL, of course, had a very good second half of the season, kind of overcoming that shaky first half. But this is why. Because of the ceiling of, here's another guy that you can add to the list of, if he pans out, if he hits his ceiling, if he hits that kind of 1% of his ceiling, well, then he's going to be a 6'11 guy who can shoot and score at all three levels and also pass the ball and also go coast to coast on rebounds. And you've compiled a lot of these guys already. And the thing is, we always talk about how hard it is to hit your ceiling. We always talk about how hard it is to get to the mountaintop. So you got to take a player's floor, take a player's ceiling, and likely find the truth somewhere in the middle of their game. The caveat to that might be, and this is kind of the grand experiment I think Oklahoma City is trying to pull off, it might be, hey, if we grab a bunch of guys whose top ceiling is this unicorn, never seen before player that can just revolutionize the game, if we grab a lot of these guys, the odds say one of them will pan out. And if one of them pans out and you add that guy to Shea and Giddey, all of a sudden you've got an incredible core. If two of those guys pan out, all of a sudden you have a historic core. And so we'll see if that's how the odds play out. But again, you're giving yourself another shot at another guy whose top 1% ceiling is revolutionary in the NBA. And that's awesome. That is exciting, to say the least. And now comes the hard part. But see, again, you've compiled so many of these guys, from Chet to Poku to Dieng to all these guys who can be this quote-unquote unicorn type of player. You've got all the guys here. You've gotten an environment and an ecosystem that is renowned in the NBA as one of the best developmental systems in the league. You've got an organization and an environment that has been conducive to growth within young players who agents and players seek out in the draft process, seek out in the undrafted process. You have success stories to where, with all those factors coinciding and all those chances to hit the top 1% of a ceiling, it makes you feel really good that they can do it. But the question becomes, what's the pathway to getting Ousmane Dieng to his 1% ceiling? Let's talk about that coming up. Let's talk about what his rookie year could look like to try to maximize his NBA potential and kind of what we want to see from him as a rookie. All that and more coming up. Plus, we're going to grade the Thunder Summer League roster. Every single player on the roster, we're going to give them a letter grade and talk about what they did well, what they didn't do so well in Summer League, and what we want to see from them come training camp and preseason as the Thunder wrap up Summer League. And so they're done playing basketball until the end of September as we roll into the October preseason and regular season and start this all over again. So a lot to get to. But first, I want to tell you right now about our good friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your sport betting needs, sport info, from the latest sport developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's MLB season. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is your fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. So check it out today and go over to BetOnline where the game starts. And folks, if you're saying to yourself right now, yeah, that's all great, but I only pay attention to the NBA. This is an NBA podcast. That's okay. You want to know why? It's because you can bet on the NBA right now. You might be thinking to yourself, well, how can I do that? The Summer League is over. Folks, the prop bets, they never stop. They never stop. Go look at the championship odds right now. The Thunder do not have the worst odds at the title. In fact, they are tied with the Pistons, Pacers, Magic, Kings, and Spurs as the second to worst odds at the title. The lone spot of worst odds to win the championship is the Houston Rockets. You can also bet on things like player future bets, prop bets like who's going to win Coach of the Year. And our guy Mark is at the very bottom, sadly, even below Steven Silas, who has the worst odds of winning, the NBA Finals, which is weird. You can bet on futures such as Chet Holmgren points per game and blocks per game. That's really fun to bet on. So check it all out today. BetOnline is where you go for all of that fun stuff. We are back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Our network is doing some great things right now, which NFL stars move the betting line the most is the question. So which of these NFL stars, we're about to begin the NFL season, contribute the most to covering the spread? And starting July 18th, Locked On is giving you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odd makers at BetOnline. So available July 18th on the Locked On NFL podcast, wherever you get podcasts from, and on YouTube. You can start this series of the top 50 most valuable NFL players to get you set for the regular season and set for betting on the NFL as that's quickly approaching as well. So check it out today, Locked On NFL, for your national NFL coverage. Now, we are back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. And folks, let's continue talking about Ousmane Dieng and kind of how his developmental pathway might shake out. After watching that Kings game and seeing how off the dribble he was able to get to the rim and create for himself as a finisher at the cup, and off of that comes, of course, playmaking and passing as well. Only had the one assist, but you can see that in his bag as well, plus the coast-to-coast stuff. Seeing all that, it's easy to say, look, this guy should spend time in the G League, and that's no knock, right? I think that there's still this negative connotation with the G League. There's nothing negative about it. It's helped progress a ton of players. Look at the difference between what Poku looks like pre and post G League, what Trey Mann looked like pre and post G League. A lot of these guys on this Thunder roster have spent time in the G League and it's gotten them a lot better. The Thunder are very comfortable using that with Grant Gibbs' system, and they're very comfortable using that whenever Mark was that coach as well, and they truly do value the G League. And so with that value, with that investment, comes better results of development. And so sending Usman Dieng down to the G League will be a good thing, and it will happen this year. Now, the question is how much? Because it's going to be hard to get all these guys into a 10-man rotation in the regular season. It's just going to be very, very difficult. And it's going to depend on how they want to balance their rotation and how they want to balance their motives for the upcoming season. And so seeing him play with the ball in his hands, it's easy to say, the blue is going to be a very viable option. The question I have, though, is how do you balance it? Because I agree that the blue is his best option of development on ball, because he's going to have so many obstacles in the NBA where he can't be on ball a lot. And I think that the best outcome for him to maximize his offensive ceiling, it's not to relegate him to an off-ball player, it's to put the ball in his hands a little bit more. I think that that's how you get to that 1% ceiling of Ousmane Dieng. So if we agree There's not a ton of ball handler minutes to be had in the NBA right now for the Thunder. They have a lot of guys who demand the ball in their hands. But the best course of action for developing Dieng long term is with the ball in his hands. How do you balance sending him to the blue and then letting him run the show and letting him do whatever he wants to do with the ball in his hands versus teaching him how to play off ball? And I think it'll be fascinating to watch, and I don't have these answers, but I think it'll be fascinating to watch how the Thunder do balance that, because if we're saying right now that he does not have the ball in his hands because of other obstacles on the roster, where are they going to go? Because those obstacles are Shai, Josh Giddey, Chet Holmgren, guys who you have locked up for the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. For Shai, of course, he's starting his 5-year extension right now. And then for Giddey, he's got 8 more years of team control. And for Chet, 9 more years. So these obstacles aren't going to disappear overnight by any means. And if all works out, they're going to be here at least for 5 years. So it'll be very interesting to see how the Thunder go about making him an off-ball player with those guys in the half-court set and also allowing him to play on ball. And now look, I personally agree with the ideology that Mark has of, everyone's a playmaker, everybody can have the ball in their hands, everybody can go coast to coast on the rebound. We want to play fast, 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 fast. I agree. And that gets you a lot of wins, especially whenever your roster is complete and you're playing the regular season. That can produce a ton of wins in the regular season. But we all know the playoffs is a different animal. And it might sound strange to talk playoffs right now because I know where the Thunder are at, but the whole goal of this, the whole goal of top 12 picks, as Dieng is to have them on the floor in the playoffs and for them to be playoff contributors. So when the game slows down and when you're forced to play in the half court, those opportunities to grab and go get smaller and smaller and smaller. How can you continue to find ways to get Dieng the ball whenever he's on the floor with Shai and Giddey and Holmgren all together, all 4 together? We've got 4 guys who are probably best with the ball in their hand. I think it's going to be very interesting and a very delicate balancing act between those things. And how much can you progress Dieng as an off-ball player? I think that the early season rotation will see Dieng a lot with the OKC Blue, and that might be what's best, because with the Blue, you can have that balance of, okay, Tuesday against Ignite, you're going to just control the game. You're basically the point guard. But against Grand Rapids on Thursday, you're playing off ball and you're getting set up by our guys. And we're trying to see kind of how you're going to play off of away from the ball in the offensive end. And you have that flexibility. Whereas, this year we're talking about roster crunch. We're talking about rotational crunch where, there's going to be guys who just don't get minutes that we really want to see get minutes and really want to see play. Some of your fan favorites are not going to play because there's not enough minutes to go around in an NBA game whenever they're all healthy. In an NBA game, you cannot find minutes, much less ball dominant minutes for Usman Dieng. So I am very curious to see what the plan is for him as a developmental project. Because whenever you close your eyes and think, okay, if Dieng hits his ceiling, what does he look like? Most often has the ball in his hands, right? That's what you're envisioning. But the pathway to get there is very difficult with the current roster, especially in the playoffs whenever things get slowed down. So I'm interested to see how that pans out and how that goes. But coming up, we're going to rank and grade all 14 roster spots. We're going to combine Gabe Brown, Robert Baker, and then Abdel Gaddy and Jaden Shackelford because they just didn't play enough to have a complete grade. Plus, wrap up how Summer League went for the Thunder as they ended up beating the Kings 86-80, as we mentioned before, where you had the Dieng pop game and the Trey Mann pop game. They beat the Warriors 90-82 as JRE went for 15 and 14, 15 points, 14 rebounds. And then whenever literally nobody played besides J. Will and Vit of the roster guys, they lost 107-71 to the New Orleans Pelicans. In Salt Lake City, they went 2-1. In Vegas, they went 3-2. Overall, their record was 5-3. So a good showing in Vegas. And now let's go and grade the roster. So we're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. I am your host, media member and editor-in-chief over at thundersandtangents.com. Rylan Styles. You can follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Styles. Follow the show on Twitter at LOThunderPod. Email the show, lothunderpod@gmail.com. On today's show, we've already went over all of what Ousmane Dieng is doing with his developmental stuff and what the pathway looks like for his rookie season. And now let's go ahead and let's preview I shouldn't say preview, let's recap and grade Summer League roster. Josh Giddey gets a flying colors A. I love what we saw from him with the ball in his hands. His ball handling looked a lot better. His driving looked much improved, much stronger, much more assertive. And even his defense looked improved. Now, I'm not worried about the jump shot. And we've talked about this, last week. I'm not worried about the jump shot at all because he's only been given 4 months to improve it. And you can't fix everything in 4 months. You can't fix a jump shot in 4 months. And this is a guy who is willing to admit he has an issue on the floor and is willing to fix it. And by all accounts is a very hard worker and is going to fix it. So I'm not worried at all about that. Chet Holmgren, he gets an A for me because he just provided a lot of calmness. And that's a word I used a lot the last 2 weeks. Watching him play in Summer League, the fear of him being a bust to me should be alleviated. Now, again, you cannot take too much away from Summer League. You cannot build a guy's whole career based on Summer League. But with Chet Holmgren, to me, it felt like a sigh of relief where this is going to be a second contract guy. This is going to be a guy who stays in the league a very long time. And maybe he never hits a superstar potential, but he's going to hit his quality starter potential, I believe, and quality piece potential as he's a shot blocker and is able to impact the game offensively. He still has that high ceiling of a superstar, but I do feel comfortable that he's going to have a higher floor than what most people projected a month ago. Just awesome from him, though, overall, especially that first game in Salt Lake City. Jalen Williams, a.k.a. J-Dub from Santa Clara, A as well. So good off ball offensively, the shooting, the cutting, the defensive strides even. Defensively, he looked really good. He is going to be a guy that I think that Thunder fans fall in love with very quickly, especially even those that didn't watch Summer League. Just immediately he's going to steal the heart of Bricktown whenever he gets to town because his personality is just out of this world good. The smile, the play on the court, the fun off the court on social media. He has the whole package. He has the whole markability factor going from him as well. Jalen Williams is going to be a player for a very, very, very long time. Aaron Wiggins, A as well. He took himself off the roster bubble to me. To me, if the Thunder would cut him, I'd be very shocked. He does have non-guarantees in his contract, but the 3-and-D, the cutting ability, and he showed off his jumper at all three levels, even in the mid-range and even as a ball handler and a passer as well. But to me, Wiggins is just the player that you need to complete a rebuild. He's a piece that you need to win you games. Again, I reference back to the last time the Thunder were good and were vying for the playoffs every single year and were trying to win championships. How many times did they lack guys like Aaron Wiggins? And so it's easier said than done to get in Aaron Wiggins, right? We always want to focus on getting the Kevin Durant's of the world, getting the Russell Westbrooks of the world. It's hard to find Aaron Wiggins as well. So once you find them, you can't just give them away willy-nilly. So I really like what Wiggins is able to do. Ousmane Dieng, I gave him a C+ because, again, the process was there. The look was there. Just sometimes the shots didn't fall, and that drug down his stats and everything. Really, I should give him a B probably because the process was there, and you saw the process working for him. And, of course, we just went over how great he looked in that last game. So that's kind of where I'm at with him. Poku was way too small of a sample size to judge, but I gave him a D-, and I graded him pretty harshly because this is a third-year player, granted his first ever Summer League, but he's played in the NBA for 3 years. This is a guy who, only having one good game in Summer League is just not, it's just not acceptable or again, Summer League's a matter. I shouldn't say acceptable. That's kind of a harsh word. And again, he's going into his third year playing, but he's played 2 years in the NBA. It's acceptable because it's Summer League, but you would have liked to see more is how I should have phrased it. You would like to see more from him as a going into his third year guy who has NBA experience than a D- and just a one good game and otherwise in that one good game looking pretty lost out there during Summer League. But Critchie, I give him a B. I love the defensive strides we've seen him make in 4 months. This is his first healthy offseason in the NBA, and he made a lot of improvements on the defensive end. Offense, of course, was still there. Trey Mann, much like Ousmane Dieng, C+, but because he had a lot of bad games, sure, stat-wise, I didn't really care. He had that huge pop game against the Kings. We know what this guy can do in the NBA. He was bad in Vegas last year, too. We know what he can do in the NBA. It's incredible what he did in the second half. And then, of course, his ankle, he had an ankle injury, but I'm not worried about that either. That seems like a very, very minor thing, minor ankle sprain, twist, whatever you want to call it. C+ for Trey Mann. JRE, I gave him a B+. Love his defensive versatility. Love the rim finishing improvement we saw from him in Summer League. And I really believe that, the shooting stroke is going to be there. And you're going to see a big percentage jump from him eventually, either this year or next year, from beyond the arc. Lindy Waters, I gave him a C+ to a B. Looked a tad better defensively, honestly, in Vegas. Shot the ball well. It's just kind of what he does at this point. Eugene Omore, he's a tank, and he shot the ball and drove the ball every chance he got. But I gave him a C because, hey, he's a nice player to have on a two-way, and I think he's going to dominate the G League if he stays healthy. But again, we can hardly find rotational spots if we're trying to decipher a rotation here as fans. We can hardly find minutes for the 11th overall pick. How are we going to find it for two-way guys? So just Jalen Williams, I gave him a D+. The first handful of games were just terrible from Jalen Williams, to be frank. But the charges drawn were great. And at the end, though, what kind of drug his grade up was at the end, he really showed off his post playmaking, and we need to see more of that. I think that the Thunder envision more of that. I've talked about how the Thunder have been pushing positionless, they've been pushing playmaking from every player on the floor and grab and go and fast paced stuff. When they get to the half court stuff, though, going back to watching Al Horford play for this team, Mark has been allowing guys to play make out of the post and run sets through the post and do dribble handoffs and stuff like that with Shea from his centers and power forwards. And so Jalen Williams can fit in on that post playmaking that Mark likes to do a lot. And of course, he still provides really good defense down low. Now, the rest of the roster, Gabe Brown was great the last game. Doesn't really matter. Rob Baker was fine whenever he got to play. Doesn't really matter. If anything, these grades are incomplete because, of course, they didn't really play that much. Abdul Gaddy had that fantastic whip pass. That was cool. But again, incomplete for all four guys because they shouldn't get an opportunity enough to play in front of us. Now, they still were practicing behind the scenes and still were performing very well in those settings, but in front of us on the grand stage, they just did not get enough opportunity to truly grade them. It'd be kind of unfair at that point. But I really like what we saw from Gabe Brown and Rob Baker in that last game. What does it actually mean? Who knows, right? Because again, the Thunders have such a roster crunch, but maybe that was good enough to get them a training camp invite, whether it's an OKC or elsewhere, where they can go and prove that they need a two-way deal or whatever. Their career kind of unfolds. So that's interesting to monitor coming up to see who's going to be on the training camp roster, who will be there for the training camp bodies, and of course, who makes the actual Thunder roster. So coming up on this Lockdown Thunder podcast this week, we're going to have a roster projection come out this week, our first roster projection of the year after Summer League. We'll do it again right at training camp starting. We'll do it again right after training camp as we head into the preseason. We'll do it again after the preseason's over, before we have the official roster in our hands for regular season. And then we'll see who's actually on the roster and see how wrong we were or right we were. So check it out. Subscribe for free across all platforms so you never miss an episode. I am your host, Rylan Stiles. You can follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. It's at RYLAN_STILES. And until tomorrow, be good and be good to one another.